we're going to take a look at counters or strategies in which you can attempt to counter Juji Gatame. Juji Gatame is most commonly known as the armbar, but more literally translated is cross pin. And obviously, when your opponent extends your arm out, if your opponent gets to that position, you really need to make sure that you act quickly before your opponent's going to finish you. So obviously, in an ideal world, you want to start your counters for this technique as early as possible. If my opponent manages to get my arm fully extended, that doesn't mean I'm going to get submitted. It just means that I really do have to act very, very quickly. But there are a lot of signs that my opponent gives off that they're going to move into or transition into Juji Gatame that I need to be able to pick up on in order to begin to counter it. It's a very common position. It's a technique that's very, very widely practiced. So having a good set of counters and strategies to try and deal with this is important. And so in this video, we're going to try and look at strategies specifically when I am on my back. So we can look at Juji Gatame from a whole variety of positions. Okay, for example, if I was on top, if I was on bottom, and my opponent's above me, but we're going to look where I'm on my back, my opponent's got into a Juji Gatame position, and how I can then begin to counter it. And I'm just going to try and give you 3 fundamental methods or strategies that you can begin to start to counter this. These are always the ones that would be my first initial go-tos, and we'll see some scenarios where they apply. Now, before we do any of that, there's one general principle I just want you to understand first, which is crucial to all 3 of the ones we're going to look at. So if Juji goes on his back for a second, just so that we're clear about the technique we're looking at. So when we're looking at Juji Gatame, we are looking at a scenario where I've got a foot across the head, I've got my foot in, I've got the arm across my hip, we're going to come to here, and we're going to break. I can have my feet in a multitude of different positions. I can have it in this position, which is called Juji Gatame, or transitional Juji Gatame, or I can have my foot across. If it is on the inside of this arm, this is normally the full Juji Gatame position, but I can also come across this shoulder. I can have his arm on the inside, and I can have my feet crossed. I think there's a whole load of different versions, but effectively, we're just going to deal with 2 scenarios that I want to think about right now, which is in any scenario where there is a leg across the torso, and in the scenario where there is not a leg across the torso. Now, in all of the versions of Juji Gatame, there's one crucial thing that they all require in order to work, and that is for my opponent's elbow to be inside my hips. If my opponent's elbow starts to drop down here to the floor, that is going to kill my Juji Gatame as the person applying the technique faster than anything else. So since we're talking about how do I counter it, that is one major thing we've got to have as a consideration. As the person applying the technique, I want to make the gap between me and my opponent and the connection between my legs and his shoulders as tight as possible. I want to keep all of this in. So I'm keeping everything tight, I'm using my legs, I'm making sure there's no space. So my opponent can't just simply yank his arm out, but I've got to be conscious of this elbow position. The moment this starts to slip and that starts to go, I have to stop doing everything else, I have to recover that, I have to work back before I can go back into Juji Gatame. So all of those things are important, and so I've got to understand, if I'm going to counter the technique, what are the major things that the person applying the technique is going to be doing, and work my counter around that, okay? So, first thing we're going to deal with is just the simple idea of trying to get that initial movement to try and just contract the elbow, okay? So, if Jay applies Juji Gatame, we'll start from this position, we'll do it from several angles. What I don't want to allow to happen is for my arm just to naturally extend, okay? So the first simplest thing I can do is I can clamp my hands together in one of several different positions. So I've got my elbow to elbow, wrist to wrist, doesn't really matter, it's just an initial clamp. The moment I do this, I want to unite my legs, use the momentum of my legs to spin myself through to contract my elbow. Just with the invisible man there for a second. So the moment I know that my arm's being pulled. I want it, if my overarm is free, I want to capture it to try and stop it just being extended, okay? This is an initial motion. I'm going to use the momentum of my legs to pull my elbow in tight to my body. Now, one thing that this also often does is, quite often, is as I swing up, I can use this movement to sit up and to come into a stat position. So I can use that to generate height over my opponent. From here, obviously, my opponent can continue to do Juji Gatame. But from here, by applying forward weight, I can again posture and contract my elbow. Once my elbow is outside the hip line, from here then, I've got a reasonably good position to continue to pass my opponent's guard, to continue to do other attacks, but I've recovered my elbow. So I have to be conscious in that first instance of the distance that my elbow is through my opponent's hip line. If it's very, very deep, I've got to, everything I do is always, the moment I see an opening, I'm going to contract it. So that's always the thing that's in the back of my mind first. Let's just look at that again. I'll do it from this angle also. So my opponent's got a version of Juji Gatame. As soon as he starts to fall back, I'm going to roll in, I'm going to catch my arm. I'm going to use the momentum of my legs to swing in. I've already got my elbow out at this point. I'm just going to move my body so you can see. My elbow is here on the outside, so it's now perfectly safe. I can come through and then continue a guard pass or whatever else I want to do. So as a first technique, if you don't understand the idea of the elbow contraction, you can be going for lots of other techniques and miss that opportunity whenever it presents itself. If ever you get the opportunity to contract that elbow, do it. And you know, it's a true saying to say that just because your opponent straightens your arm doesn't mean they're going to get Juji Gatame on. It doesn't mean they're going to be able to finish and complete the breaking mechanics that are going to ultimately submit you. And that's largely because you still have time, as long as you're quick, to deal with that elbow position. So if you can do that, it's going to save you a lot at the very end, the very last thing, you know, it happens. But there were some other options, so let's have a look at those. So we saw there an example of I can use the momentum on my legs to turn into my opponent, okay? And that in itself is a legitimate strategy, so I can turn in. But I can also turn out, okay? So my opponent's in the same position. This time, as he starts to fall back, it doesn't even matter if I don't manage to get this hand. I'm going to open my fingers, spread them as wide as possible, curl my little finger in and bring it to this hip, okay, from this position. I'm going to bring that in. So my opponent here will be obviously desperately trying to straighten my arm. From here, I'm going to make sure that his foot isn't under my shoulder, but rather my shoulder is flat to the floor. That will enable me to turn my head, backward roll, come out, and then from here, I can come in, start to complete the act of trying to pass his guard from there, or from this side, drive in, and the side depends on how he recovers. Again. So from here, as he falls back, I come one, you can see I bridge my hips to generate a little bit of height, turn, sink, throw my hips back, over, and then drive back in and through. Having that particular rollback method as an important early go-to is important because it generates a bit of movement. You can have that reflex of folding the arm and it often will get you out of trouble. It can even work if your opponent does start to straighten your arm, but there's another question we always deal with, is what happens if our opponent's in full Juji Gatame. So what you'll notice that we did there is Jay started in Utsuri Juji, transitional where the foot is in this position. So I don't have to worry about a torso leg. But if this leg is over, then we do have to worry about that. So he now has both these legs cause me problems. So I can't just simply turn out into this. So what I initially need to do is use the same initial turn in, and I need to take this foot and use a method of either stuffing the leg, okay, that's going to enable me to then bring that through, or I can bring my knee on the inside, come over, and then same thing, turn, come back through, and then come back into the original technique, wherever I'm going to go. So if I have a leg across my body, I can't ignore it, I do have to deal with it sadly. Okay, so so my foot's got both feet across. The moment he starts to fall back, I curl that in. If I sense a gap, at any point I'm going to contract the elbow. But if he's doing a good job of holding on, he's probably going to be trying to pull my arm out at this point. I start the action of putting pressure under the foot, bringing the knee and legs in, that starts to turn my opponent. From here I've got one leg, I keep the pressure up, I lift my shoulders, I keep that foot down, I turn, bring my hips through, back and roll, and then come in. My opponent might start to recover his guard from here, obviously we go back, but I've no longer in the Juji Gatame. Okay? So first we've seen contract the elbow. Second, we've seen that from that elbow contraction, I can turn in and up, okay? I can come follow my opponent that way, so I can posture up and drive the arm through. And third, I've seen a version where we can then roll out backwards when the leg is across or not across the body, but in both cases, what I've got to deal with. I'm just going to give you one more little thing to think about, which is, in the first technique, we saw that I can recover by making use of my other hand. The other thing I can use to recover sometimes, and this again is, really if I'm in the last moments of this technique, it's really not looking great for me, is I can use my feet, okay? I can use my feet, and sometimes I find that if my opponent, I'm dealing with something that's particularly good at this technique, that this is the last thing I can do. Like, my opponent's got my arms straight, I can't just snatch my elbow out, I can't turn it, but he is literally at the point where he's about to break my arm. What am I going to do? And so my general strategy for this is I'm going to make use of my legs, okay? So it doesn't matter whether my opponent's got both feet over or the 1 foot over, but my opponent's now done the job of bringing this arm all the way down. So as we saw before, I can use the moment I get that, I don't want to let my legs turn this way and have my body stretched. I want to turn my knees in to here. My elbow still is not out, so there is still a legitimate threat here of the strangulation. But I can get my feet to this point, so I can follow my own arm and strip to create pressure. So as Jay tries to pull down on the arm now, that pressure into his own arm makes that difficult. I can also come over the top and try and do it this way. So no matter what grip he has, even if he sits up and tries to throw the arm over the top, which is obviously from here, which is obviously from there, I can push off the shoulder, okay? Then from there, by increasing that space, I can contract the elbow, start to come up, and then start to come round from a different angle. So we'll go this way. Back. So from here, Jay has now got a good grip on my arm. He's got my arm all the way out straight. From here, if I don't do anything, he can submit me, so he submits. That's on, okay? So from here, I'm going to turn my legs. I'm going to get to this position. My elbow is still not totally free. Again, if I don't do anything, Jay can submit me from here. The technique is still there. So he's going to be continuing to pull this tight. He's going to be scooting his butt in. But I've got my 3 legs now that I can come over the top. I can start to pinch, create pressure. I can come in. If I've got this hand to help support for a minute, I can. And then I'm going to push to strip. I stretch him out to get that elbow through. As soon as that elbow's through, I can come to an elbow. From this position, if I can actually get up and stabilise, I'm actually in a very good passing position again, having been in a terrible position moments before. So I can obviously come through, continue to do whatever it is that I want to. Okay. So again, that technique, don't open with that. That's not the place I would start. But if your opponent's got your arms straight and there really is not a great deal else left for you to do, trying to use your legs to help reinforce and support that arm just to give you a second, half a second, may be the thing that gets you out of trouble. So remember, any time you see an opening to extract your elbow, go for it. And do that first, just open with that. Right? If you can use that momentum to turn and whip the elbow in, you're going to extract your arm a lot. If you're doing that as we have in this video, and we've looked at it purely from when you're on your back, then posture doesn't matter, momentum matters, okay? You want to bring it underneath yourself. But if you're doing it from a kneeling position, a standing position, your opponent's underneath you, posture is important, so just bear that in mind. Anytime you see that, go for it. Second thing is you can use that same momentum to turn into your opponent, to put them into a static position, to reorientate yourself. If you're combining that with an arm grip, which is always a line of defence that you've got to overcome when you're dealing with Juji Gatame, then you can use that to get to a good position, use that posture to again slip the elbow out, use pressure and weight to put your opponent in a position where they're unable to continue to do Juji Gatame effectively. Third method, which is one of the most important ones, is that turn-out method, okay, where you're going to fold your little finger edge down into the hip to make sure the arm is curled, to make sure it's folded, it's hidden as much as possible, and then execute the backward roll. So remember, if the foot is across the body, you've got to stuff that first, you can't just roll into it, okay? So I would always make sure you try and remove that leg. There are methods where you stuff the leg, there are methods where you strip the leg and put it underneath you. Both can work, it just depends on what strategy you generally want to go for. And then you also got the fourth method of if everything else has gone wrong, your opponent has got your arm straight and you've lost your initial grip of your hands, then remember your feet can still act to help you, okay? So if you can use those feet just to push or pin your opponent's arms as they go to apply the technique, or to push the shoulder away, you can just create that half a split second opening that may be all you need to go back to the original technique, which is to extract that elbow. Okay, so always open with that, always look to do that first. And I really hope the next time you get caught in a Juji Gatame that one of these methods will be useful and will help you get out. And if it does, please let me know. I would love to hear about it. I hope it helps. Good luck in your training, guys. See you in the next video.